The talk show host thought he had the upper hand until Pam Bondi flipped the conversation, leaving him scrambling for a comeback. The studio lights were blinding, hotter than expected. Pam had been on TV countless times, debated high-profile cases, stood before crowds of reporters, but today felt different. There was a quiet tension in the air, a sense that something was off. She adjusted her blazer, keeping her posture straight as she sat across from Graham Layton. Layton, host of The Exchange, was known for aggressive questioning, turning interviews into interrogations. Pam had been invited to discuss law and justice, but she could tell there was another plan. The energy in the room was cold, expectant like the audience was waiting for a fight. A producer counted down. The red camera light flickered on. Graham leaned in with a practiced smile. "Pam, welcome to The Exchange." She nodded. "Thank you for having me." His voice carried an unmistakable bite. "Some say your decisions hurt more than they helped. Would you say that's fair?" Pam stayed unfazed. "That's an oversimplification, but I'm happy to discuss specifics. Some would say you've turned a blind eye to justice when it suited you." The room felt smaller. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Pam remained still, pulse steady. She knew this tactic provoke a reaction, make the guests defensive, fluster them. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, she met his gaze directly. "You seem eager to make this personal. Graham, I hope you'll actually let me answer instead of just throwing accusations." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Graham's expression flickered just for a second. But he wasn't finished. "Let's talk about power," he continued smoothly. "Politicians, prosecutors, you all claim to serve justice, but justice often bends for those with influence." Pam stayed firm. Graham leaned back, voice sharpening. "When you were Attorney General, corporate donors got special treatment. Investigations vanished. Can you look this audience in the eye and deny it? A trap. A denial would seem dishonest. An admission would be twisted." Pam exhaled, voice even. "Be specific." "Graham, what cases?" Graham smirked. "Oh, we'll get specific." The audience chuckled low, expectant. He flipped through a stack of papers, real or not, creating the illusion of damning evidence. "Back in your tenure, a lawsuit against one of your donors disappeared." What a coincidence. Pam knew exactly what he meant and how he was twisting it. She started to speak, but Graham cut her off. "Tell me, Pam, why should Americans believe people like you don't just protect the wealthy, while the rest get left behind?" That landed like a punch. The audience murmured. Pam felt it. This was the moment Graham had been waiting for. He thought he had her, but he underestimated her. Pam inhaled slowly, letting the silence linger just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then she leaned forward slightly. "You know, Graham, it's interesting how you frame things." He blinked barely, but she caught it. "You present this case as a scandal, when in reality, it was fully investigated. The claims didn't hold up. No cover-up, no backroom deals, just the legal process playing out." But that wouldn't make for an exciting headline, would it? The audience shifted, whispers spreading. The weight in the room was changing. Graham felt it too. He wasn't used to losing control. So, he changed tactics. "Let's put politics aside. Let's talk about character." Pam didn't react. She knew where this was going. "You built a reputation as a tough prosecutor, but what happens when those principles only apply when convenient?" The audience tensed. "You talk about justice, but do you remember the protests outside that Tampa movie theater?" Pam's jaw tightened slightly. She knew exactly what he meant. That night had been a media frenzy. She had gone to see a documentary, Nothing Politically Yet. Outside, protesters waited. They shouted, called her a disgrace, accused her of ignoring them. Then, as she walked past, someone spat at her. It had been caught on camera, circulated for days. Some called it justified outrage. Others called it assault. Graham leaned in. People were angry. Some lost everything because of policies you defended. And instead of engaging, you walked away. Some would say that's cowardly. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Pam exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "Let's be clear. Graham, you're talking about a situation where I was harassed in public, where I was physically assaulted. Are you suggesting I should have stood there and taken it?" Graham raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. Pam's voice sharpened. "If you are, say it plainly. Let's not dance around it. Defend mob intimidation on national television." Silence. For the first time, Graham hesitated. The audience wasn't just watching a guest on the defensive. They saw a host being called out. He recovered quickly. "I'm saying desperate people do desperate things. When leaders refuse to engage, they feel abandoned." Pam didn't break eye contact. "Desperation doesn't justify violence. Would you say the same if it were a journalist, a politician you agree with, or do the rules change based on the target?" More murmurs. Graham exhaled, irritated. "So you're playing the victim?" Pam leaned back. "I don't have to. The footage speaks for itself. But if you want a real conversation instead of manufactured drama, I'm happy to." A beat of silence. Graham flipped a page, recalibrating. The cracks in his confidence were subtle, but they were there. So he pivoted. Let's be honest, Pam, you've defended policies most Americans find problematic. Without power, wouldn't you be just another person left behind by the system you upheld? A clever trap painting her as privileged, detached. Pam saw through it. Interesting argument. You think working in the system means I don't understand it? Graham smirked. I'm saying you benefited from it. Pam leaned in. You have a lot of opinions about my past, so let me ask, what's your definition of justice? Graham faltered. Excuse me. She gestured toward him. You imply corruption, favoritism, that. I'm here because of privilege. So tell me, is justice about who shouts the loudest? Who makes the most accusations, or is it about facts? Graham's lips parted, searching for a response. Pam didn't give him the chance. If the system is so broken, Graham, I'd love to hear your solution. You've had plenty of time to criticize me. But what exactly would you do differently? Silence. A slow murmur rippled through the audience. Graham's fingers curled slightly against the desk. That's not my job, Pam. She nodded. Exactly. Your job is to stir controversy. To frame things a certain way. To make people think there's always a scandal, always a conspiracy. But let's get real, you don't actually care about justice. You care about making a spectacle. Gasps, murmured approval. For the first time, Graham blinked, his composure slipping. Pam sat back. So, if we're done playing games, I'd love to actually talk about the issues, but if you just want sound bites, let me know. I'd hate to waste your time. The tension was suffocating. Graham glanced at the camera, then back at Pam, exhaling sharply. All right, he said, voice tighter. Let's talk about the issues. But he wasn't in control anymore. The audience knew it. Graham drummed his fingers lightly against the desk, recalibrating. He was supposed to steer the conversation, keep his guest on the defensive. Instead, Pam had turned the tide. He forced a smile, though it was noticeably strained. All right, Pam, you want to talk about facts? Let's talk about facts. Pam nodded. Waiting, Graham flipped through his notes, a stall tactic more than anything. You've been in the legal world for years. Prosecutor, attorney general, consultant. A lot of power, a lot of influence. Yet somehow, every time controversy arises, you come out clean. Some might find that suspicious. Pam raised an eyebrow. Are you accusing me of something? Graham spread his hands. I'm saying the average person doesn't have that luxury. When they get tangled in the system, they don't walk away unscathed. Pam's expression didn't waver. The law isn't about luxury, Graham. It's about understanding. Navigating. That applies to everyone, including me. Graham smirked, but weaker this time. Easy to say when you have resources to fight back. Pam exhaled. You're right, not everyone has the same resources. That's why understanding the law matters. Why due process exists. Why cases can't be tried based on outrage or headlines. Graham opened his mouth, but Pam wasn't finished. In fact, that's exactly what we're doing right now, isn't it? You're not interested in facts. You want to frame me as privileged, as someone who dodges accountability, but you have no proof, no case. Just vague accusations meant to stir the pot. The audience murmured again. Graham's jaw clenched just for a second. He was losing them. He could feel it. Pam tilted her head slightly. Pam's voice was steady. So tell me, Graham, do you want a real discussion, or just a spectacle? Graham inhaled sharply. People want transparency. Pam nodded. Then let's be transparent. Why do you keep interrupting? Why throw accusations instead of discussing policy? The audience murmured. Some nodded. Graham forced a laugh. I'm just asking tough questions. Pam smiled. No, you're chasing headlines. Silence. Graham glanced at the producer, searching for an out. But the room was on her side now. A single clap, then another. The applause rippled through the audience. Graham straightened his papers, forcing a tight smile. Well, Pam, you've made an impression. She met his gaze. I tend to. The red light turned off. Graham exhaled. Pam stood, smoothing her blazer. If you ever want a real conversation, let me know. Graham scoffed. I ask the questions people care about. Pam smirked. No, you ask the questions that get clicks. And with that, she walked off. Notifications blew up. Twitter, Facebook, news alerts. Pam tapped on a trending hashtag. Pam Bondi Unfiltered. Clips of the interview had gone viral. People were dissecting every moment. Her pushback, Graham's struggle, the audience's shift in energy. Some called it a take. Others said it was a rare moment when a guest refused to be stumbled. She scrolled through a tweet. Graham thought he had the upper hand, until Pam flipped the script. Brutal. There were critics too, twisting her words, but the narrative was clear. Pam had owned the interview. As she stepped outside into the cool evening air, she took a deep breath. This was politics. This was media. Pam didn't win by yelling or getting angry. She won by staying sharp, refusing to be baited, and controlling the narrative. A lesson for anyone watching. Stay calm, stay focused, and take control of the conversation. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe for more analysis. Have you ever had to stand your ground? Let us know in the comments.